Death of a Shrewd Man. Shrewdness is not a virtue, the sticker on the car in front of me read. I was left to wonder what situation had prompted the owner to display it so prominently. To be shrewd, according to the dictionary, means having or showing astute or sharp judgment in practical matters, sometimes at the cost of moral compromise. It was that last phrase that troubled me, for the circle of friends and leaders that I had moved in during the last 2 decades valued, perhaps enthroned, the concept of shrewdness. Like many a young person, I had endured 4 years of Bible college, to put it in the words of the band Chicago, looking for a song, a cause to believe in and promote. But I found only tedium and superficiality in teachers whose only interest was in repeating what they had been told and preserving the religious status quo, and that in a monotone. That is why I was drawn to a local preacher who, to use a biblical phrase, spoke with authority and not as others. That first sermon which I heard was about the Christian family and the differing responsibilities of husband and wife, was practical in the extreme, and something I had never heard either from my dysfunctional family, nor growing up in church, nor later in college chapel. Over the years, I amassed volumes of sermon notes written in detail of the man's sermons, and even comments made in the more informal Wednesday night prayer meeting. Now, as a member of the church, I dutifully married a woman in our circles, and the two of us began a little ministry of cooking and feeding folks who were driving long distances to hear the preaching of the Reverend Albert Martin. Practically speaking, all of our resources, emotionally and even financially, became tied up in our association with the Trinity Baptist Church. The cause, of course, was to extend the preaching ministry of the pastor around the country and the world, the assumption being that his words were God's truth. That premise, that presupposition, was never to be questioned. Everything here is strictly logical from top to bottom, my friend Kenny said. He was a long-haired young man that attended each Sunday's after-church meal in the church basement. Everything, that is, except Christianity itself. Those were fighting words, but hot theological discussions had become typical on those occasions and usually ended up with, "Well, you see it your way, I'll see it God's way," by one or another of the Baptist boys at the table. The bottom line was that two things were not to be questioned, one being our faith itself and the other being the words of Albert N. Martin. In retrospect, I should have known better, but I admire the authority, the discipline, the talk about principled living and integrity, things that were so lacking in my and my wife's religious upbringing. But those were high and lofty standards that many of us would find that in reaching these goals, things like kindness and compassion might just have to be jettisoned. Over the years, our marriage began to deteriorate for various reasons, and the pastor's response was expected. Do this, don't do that, read this, read that, and so on. These were all logical answers that suited the mind and the intellect, but not the soul. Addressing the deep needs in our marriage would take a great deal of discovery, of therapy, and encouragement. These would take time and use a great deal of the church's resources. This did not suit the pastor's agenda. More time passed, and my wife and I continued to carry huge pans of food up and down the church stairs, as well as having newcomers to the church actually live with us and endure our awkward marital situation. During that time, friends would suddenly disappear from the 3 weekly church services, and it would be announced, or sometimes just whispered, that they had been suspended or excommunicated from the group. One lady with whom my wife and I shared the sorrow of infertility committed suicide. It was not even mentioned the following Wednesday night at prayer meeting. Eventually, I too joined those who disappeared from the church body. It was later learned that the pastors of the Trinity Baptist Church had been involved in the breakup of our marriage. Except for the kindness of one family, none of our friends, out of fear of the elders, made any effort to contact me. Sometime later, when another local pastor questioned their actions, the elders of the Trinity Baptist Church responded by asking my wife to leave the church as well. So today, over 25 years later, it was announced that the Reverend Albert N. Martin was dead, and a memorial service is being prepared. I am sure that it'll be well attended, and there will be accolades and testimonials, but the reality, which no one will admit, is that in the end, Pastor Martin was a shrewd man and not necessarily a virtuous one, and that the cause which we had strived for has all but been lost in American Christianity, which is itself consumed not by integrity nor principle, but by the adoration of shrewd preachers and politicians. Thank you very much. This is Dean Carroll.